Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squad for boxing news and views from around the internet. Gerald Washington has dug deep and scored a highlight reel KO against Robert Helenius in Minnesota on a PBC card. This was a very good performance by Washington. He was gassing badly in the fight. He really pulled it out when it counts, stopped Helenius in the 8th round. It started off with a right hand, and then he followed up moments later with another huge right hand. Absolutely lays out Robert Helenius. You can see here on screen, he is sprawled partway through the ropes. He was never getting up from that. Gerald Washington, he looked like he was going to get beaten in this fight. It was a seesaw roller coaster fight, and I'll briefly cover the action, but this one was back and forth, both having moments of success. But ultimately, Washington delivers when it counts. He comes back from, he looked like he was out of the fight almost, and at the time of the stoppage, he was actually down on 2 of the judges' scorecards. I had Helenius up by a round or 2 at the time of the stoppage. Very seesaw, ebbing and flowing sort of fight. Round 1, Washington actually starts strong, but at this point, he's actually, instead of like the Kovnatsky fight where he gave up his height and his reach, he didn't opt to do that in this fight, which was, I think, a very good tactic. He is working the jab, mixing it up downstairs and upstairs, but Helenius is responding with his own jabs, and as the round wears on, he actually starts to have more success, and he is landing the better and cleaner work. And close round, but I gave it to Helenius. He actually outlanded Washington in that round. Second round, Helenius is really starting to manage the distance well. Washington is falling short. He looks like he's getting a bit frustrated, and a couple of vicious body shots almost on the bell. That swung the round for him, for me at least. So I gave the second round to Helenius, but it was round 3 and round 4 where Washington started to adjust, started to adapt. He got his jab going. He started to land some shots. He got a strong straight right hand to Helenius. He hurts Helenius, stuns him momentarily. It was a close round, but I thought that Washington was starting to work into his rhythm. And round 4, this is where Washington probably looked at his best in the fight. And he also lands a huge right hand on Helenius, stunning him, and he landed a few other shots of note as the round wore on. He was in a rhythm, and it looked like he was really settling into his work at this point in the fight. But round 5, it seemed like the pace of the fight was catching up with Washington to some extent, a little more sedate. Both guys eating some shots, both have their chins up in the air, and they are both begging to be hit with something. Washington landed the more work overall, including a very nice body shot. I gave him that round. But from round 6, Helenius, he started to take the ascendancy again. He went back to his jab. He was shooting a number of jabs to the body, and at this point, Washington looked to be visibly gassing quite badly. Washington then eats all these jabs, hard, strong jabs from Helenius, and he just wasn't responding. A cut also opened up over his right eye in that round, and it did seem to be bothering him. Helenius, it was a good bounce back round, and he looked like he was wresting control of the fight. Round 7, another good round for Robert Helenius. He lands a good right hand on Washington, backs him up, and he really is taking control of the fight, and Washington looks very depleted, very spent at this point. He wasn't having much of an impact. He wasn't having much success at all. His accuracy was dropping drastically. His work was just either falling short or not really finding the mark. Round 8. This is where it turned on its head after Robert Helenius had sort of started to take over the fight in the previous couple of rounds. Washington rocks him with a straight right hand. Helenius does a Bambi dance, and then he follows up, Washington that is, with a massive right hand. I've already been through that, but this is the punch that came in, and Helenius, he was done. He was never getting up from that, and Washington deserves full credit for coming back in that fight and performing in the way he did, especially when he was actually starting to lose control of the fight. That was a good bounce back, and for Washington's career, he needed it. This was a crossroads fight for him. If he lost that, he would have been relegated to journeyman, high-level journeyman status. As it was, a number of people already saw him sort of in that vein. He proved that he's still a guy, at least a fringe contender of sorts, somewhere around the top 30. Probably doesn't deserve to be any higher in the conversation than that. I don't think he's a top 20 fighter at this point, but at least he hasn't fallen down another rung on the ladder. Robert Helenius coming into this fight was the favourite, power in both hands, expected to either outwork or knock out Gerald Washington, but ultimately gets knocked out himself. His chin was in the air. He was very upright right throughout the fight. He was begging to be clipped, and ultimately Washington was able to land something of note. So yeah, he fought well for stretches in the fight, but this was not a great fight by any stretch of the imagination. Both guys showed that I think their days as contending for a title are probably done, but this was an entertaining fight, back and forth action. Robert Helenius, where do we rate him now? Probably somewhere in the same mold, around, top 25, top 30, but on the strength and the basis of that performance, yeah, I can't really see him contending for a title. He registers his third loss of his career, and Gerald Washington arrests his sort of freefall within the division, and he probably has guaranteed himself another decent payday of sorts at least. I wouldn't mind actually seeing Washington against Charles Martin, and that's where I'll get to next, just briefly covering that fight with Daniel Martz. But very good performance by Gerald Washington, credit where credit is due. Helenius back to the drawing board, and at 35, hard to see where he goes from here to get back in the conversation for a title shot. He was very highly rated in the IBF, and he'll probably either drop right down or out of the top 15 now after this loss. And getting to Charles Martin and Daniel Martz. Martz is stopped in the fourth round in what actually turned out to be a relatively entertaining fight. More entertaining than I was expecting. I had very low expectations for Daniel Martz, who is a full-time waiter. He is a journeyman. He came into this with a record of 18-6. He drops this to move to 18-7, and I think one draw as well. It was a bit of a strange fight because Martin started out so sluggishly, and Martz had very good success in the second round. He was putting it on Martin at different points in that round. So much so, I gave him that round. But he always looked one punch, or should I say one straight left hand, away from disaster. And by round 3, Martin really started to warm into his work, and it was that round 3 where he really beat the fight out of Daniel Martz. And before the ref waved it off, Martz was down twice. The first time, it didn't look like a heavy knockdown, but the second one, it really was, it took the stuffing out of Daniel Martz. A straight left hand to the body under Martz's left armpit. And he did, even though he got up and he beat the count, you could see there was that look on his face. He didn't want to be there anymore. He was looking for the referee to sort of call it off, and he obliged. So Charles Martin gets a stoppage in the fourth round via body shot. And after the fight, Martin said, it was a good performance, and then he went into an explanation about not getting warmed up properly and that he had to get a second win. So maybe that explains the slow start, but yeah, I thought it was a little bit quizzical that he went to that length of explanation about the warm-ups and that sort of thing. I just thought he just didn't really fire in those first couple of rounds, but he did come on strong from the third onwards. And when he was asked about what do you want to do next, who do you want to fight, he said he would like to see himself fighting for another world title by the end of the year. And then he went on to name Deontay Wilder and Manuel Charr. Charr fight, maybe that's a remote possibility. Deontay Wilder, absolutely not. But Manuel Charr is looking to, if he doesn't fight Trevor Bryan, because that one hasn't been announced in terms of the date and the venue, which is it should have been by now, he'll be open to probably the highest offer. And I'm not sure that a Charles Martin offer to face Manuel Charr is going to be the best money available for Manuel Charr, but we shall see what happens there. I think that Charr will ultimately get picked off by someone who can give him a decent payday. Anyway, what do you make of it all? Gerald Washington sparks out Robert Helenius in the 8th round, come from behind to get the highlight reel knockout, and Charles Martin also advances, stopping Daniel Martz in the 4th. Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.